I used to think Wren Hollow would be my final resting place, not in death, but in peace. It stood at the edge of the forest like a secret no one wanted to admit, its windows always too dark, its halls too quiet. The town spoke of it in whispers, as if saying its name too loudly would stir something buried beneath its foundation. And I let them whisper. I let them believe I was just the quiet old widow who tended her roses and walked her creaking halls like a ghost. But they didn't know what I'd seen, what I'd survived. And when the fire came, I knew it wasn't just flames that wanted to consume the house. It was everything we'd buried with it. The truth doesn't die in silence. It waits for smoke, for ash, and for someone like me to speak. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Marian Elwood, and Wren Hollow was never just a house. It was a legacy wrapped in velvet lies and polished smiles. For 38 years, I kept the secrets of that estate, swallowing silence with every morning tea. But when the fire came, when the flames ate through the floorboards and blackened the portraits, I realized it wasn't an accident. It was an inheritance settled in smoke. And now, for the first time, I will tell you the truth. I remember the scent first. Not the acrid sting of smoke, but the faint trace of lavender and ash, unnatural and familiar all at once. I had just come in from the garden, dirt still under my nails, when I saw the flicker through the east window. A glow golden and trembling, licking the air like a whisper trying to speak. For a moment, I thought it was the sun. For a moment, I prayed it was. But the sun doesn't flicker in fear. The sun doesn't crackle with hunger. Wren Hollow had always creaked with memory. Each floorboard had a voice, each wall a spine. You don't live in a place like that for nearly 4 decades without learning its language. And that night, it screamed. The fire began in the library, the one room I never let them renovate. The room I always kept locked, claiming sentimental reasons. Truth was, the books weren't what I was protecting. It was what was hidden behind them. I stood frozen, the garden gloves still on my hands, watching the flames trace the window panes like curious fingers. The fire hadn't spread yet. Not completely. But I knew, even as I stepped onto the porch, even as my throat tightened with the beginnings of a shout, this wasn't an accident. This was a warning. Or a message. The neighbors were the first to respond, of course. Always eager for drama, always pretending concern. I saw it in their eyes, the relief that it wasn't their home, the curiosity itching behind their brows. One of them, young Lydia from across the street, asked if I had been using the fireplace. Sweet girl. Too sweet. She didn't know that the fireplace hadn't worked in years. And I let her believe it was just old wiring, just misfortune. But I knew better. Because just before the flames reached the ceiling, I saw it, tucked under the scorched frame of the portrait above the hearth. A single red envelope. Untouched. And I knew. Someone wanted me to remember what I'd spent decades trying to forget. The fire brigade arrived too late to save the East Wing. The library, the portrait gallery, and the solarium were reduced to blackened beams and sagging ash by the time the hoses hissed to life. I stood by the hydrangeas, my housecoat clinging to my arms in the midnight chill, and watched the only part of Wren Hollow that had ever truly belonged to me crumble into smoke. I clutched the envelope against my chest like a relic. The red was too deliberate, too pristine to have survived the flames by chance. The corners hadn't curled. The seal, a faded gold crest I hadn't seen in over 30 years, was untouched. It was as if the fire had bowed around it, acknowledging the contents as something sacred or cursed. I didn't open it right away. Not out there in the open, not with the neighbors watching. Their eyes were gentle, but probing. Whispers hovered just out of reach. I offered thanks in a brittle voice, letting them herd me into Lydia's house for tea and warm blankets and questions that sounded like sympathy. But the envelope never left my grip. Later, when I was alone in Lydia's guest room, sitting upright on a bed that smelled too much like vanilla and not enough like thyme, I slit the seal with my thumbnail. The flap opened with a sigh, as if even the paper had been waiting to speak. Inside was a single sheet, folded once. "You buried me, Marianne." But ashes don't forget. No name, no signature. Just that sentence, penned in handwriting I hadn't seen since 1993. My blood went cold. My fingers shook, but my mind didn't. I remembered that day in perfect clarity, the night he fell, the way the floorboards swallowed the secret, and how I thought I had finally ended the story. But someone else knew. And now they were writing the next chapter. I didn't sleep that night. Not that I expected to. Lydia checked in on me once around 3 in the morning, her eyes shadowed with concern and exhaustion. I pretended to be dozing, my back to the door, the letter tucked under the mattress like a loaded pistol. When the morning sun broke through the blinds, slicing the room into golden fragments, I rose like an old hinge. Stiff, slow, but not broken. I dressed in silence, buttoned my blouse with practiced care, and fixed my face into something neutral. In Wren Hollow, a composed face was armor. I had worn it through funerals, through whispers of scandal, through the long winters of marriage to a man whose smile was always a little too smooth. I returned to what was left of the house just after the fire investigators cleared the scene. The air still reeked of charred wood and wet soot. I wandered through the remains, each step sending puffs of ash into the air. I half expected the house to speak again, to groan, to creak, to resist my presence. But it was silent. Among the rubble of the library, I found the photo album. Not intact, but not destroyed either. Singed edges, brittle pages, but the contents inside remained visible. My fingers trembled as I turned each page. Weddings, christenings, dinners with people long buried. And then near the back there he was, the man who wasn't supposed to exist anymore. Standing beside my late husband, a hand on his shoulder, smiling that thin, triumphant smile. Victor Dane. He wasn't family, not by blood. But in those years before the house began to rot with secrets, he might as well have been. He was Richard's protégé, our daughter's godfather, an ever-present fixture in the estate until the night he disappeared. The police had ruled it a tragic accident. A fall from the east attic. No foul play. But no body either. I remembered the weight of him cold, still, before I dragged what remained into the hollow space behind the library wall. It had taken me nearly 3 hours, and I'd wept only once. I had buried that moment so deeply that even the house dared not speak of it again. Until now. As I stared down at his photograph, I noticed something else, something new. A fresh crease in the corner. Someone had folded it recently. And on the back, scrawled in that same unmistakable handwriting, "I watched you pull the boards back. I watched you walk away." I had sealed him away with my own hands. I remembered every splinter that dug into my skin, every rusty nail I pressed back into place, sealing silence into the bones of Wren Hollow. That hollow behind the library wall wasn't just a hiding place. It was a confession I thought would never find a voice again. But someone had seen. The fire hadn't been to destroy evidence. No, it had been to unearth it. To pull at the seams of a carefully stitched past and let the threads spill into daylight. I returned to the ruin just after dusk. The investigators were gone by then, leaving behind caution tape and the lingering chill of half-told truths. I moved past the debris, deeper into the remains of the East Wing, until I stood where the library used to breathe. The air smelled less of fire now and more of memory. I cleared the ash from where the false panel once sat. The wall had collapsed in the blaze, leaving the space open like a wound. The boards I'd placed decades ago were gone, burned or torn away. And inside, where I had once left a man to vanish, was nothing. No bones. No remnants. Just the faint indentation in the dirt, like someone had once lain there and then stood up. That's when I saw it. A trail of footprints faint, almost erased by the settling ash leading away from the hollow, toward the servants' staircase that spiraled down into the wine cellar. A place that hadn't been touched in years. I followed them without hesitation. Something old inside me had reawakened. Not fear. No, Fear had visited often over the years, and we were intimate, familiar companions. This was something colder, determined. The cellar door creaked like a confession. The stairs moaned beneath my weight. I descended with slow, deliberate steps, the air thickening as I reached the bottom. It was darker than it should have been. Still, silent. And then a whisper. Not imagined. Real. Rugged and low. Too late to unbury the dead now, Marianne? I froze, my hand trembling on the railing. That voice, it was aged, worn down like stone underwater, but still unmistakably his. Victor. But Victor was dead. I had buried him myself. The cellar swallowed my breath. The silence thickened, pressing in around me like a second skin. That voice, rasped, unmistakable, echoed through the darkness not as a memory, but as a presence. Alive. I clutched the edge of the stair rail as if it could tether me to reality, my eyes straining to pierce the gloom. The cellar had always been large, larger than it needed to be. My husband, Richard, used to boast that it had once been a prohibition hideaway. He loved showing guests the old brickwork, the iron racks still laced with dust-covered bottles. But I had always hated the place. It was too quiet, too damp, and the air always smelled faintly of mildew and regret. "Who's there?" I said. My voice cracked like dry paper. Silence followed. For a moment, I thought I had imagined it, that grief and guilt had finally woven themselves into delusion. I took another step forward, toward the center of the room, and something crunched beneath my shoe. A scrap of burnt wood. From the library, maybe? Or a piece of the wall I had built to conceal what should never have surfaced. And then I saw it. On the far side of the cellar, just beyond the last row of rusted racks, was a folding chair. Ordinary. Plain. But positioned deliberately, facing the stairs as if someone had been waiting. Atop it sat a small recorder. A tape deck, the kind you'd expect to see in some detective's office, from the 1970s. Next to it, a single candle flickered in a shallow dish, casting elongated shadows on the walls. I stepped closer. My breath held tight in my chest. The tape was already rewound. Labeled in faded ink, "Marianne, play me." My hand hovered above it. I didn't want to press the button. I didn't want to hear what came next. But I had lived with too many silences, too many secrets. If this was Victor's voice from beyond the grave, or worse, from somewhere cruelly alive, I had to know. I pressed play. The tape crackled for a moment, a static hum that raised every hair on my arms. Then came his voice. "You were always careful, Marianne. Always so precise. You thought that wall would be enough. You thought forgetting would mean erasure. But not everything that's buried stays dead. I was never after revenge. Not at first. I only wanted you to remember what you did and what you left behind. But now I want something more." Click. The tape stopped. A second tape sat beneath the chair. No label. Just a small slip of paper beneath it, handwritten in the same script. The rest of the truth waits in the crypt. I blinked. The crypt. God help me, there was a crypt. Under the garden. Beneath the roses I'd tended all these years. The garden had always been my sanctuary. While the rest of Wren Hollow creaked with memory and concealed rot beneath polished wood, the garden bloomed with deceptive beauty. It was the only place I felt I could breathe. Every morning, I'd walk among the rose bushes, whispering little prayers into the petals, some for peace, some for forgetting. And yet, even there, I had planted lies. Beneath the oldest rose tree, the one that bloomed in crimson even during the grayest seasons, there was a hatch. Few knew it existed, and those who did thought it nothing more than an old storm cellar. But I knew what lay beneath. A stone crypt. A chamber untouched since the war. It had been built by Richard's grandfather, or so the story went. Meant for preservation during raids, or maybe for secrets even older than this family. I had only been down there once on a dare in the early days of my marriage. Richard had wanted to show me something. I never asked what. Because what I saw in that place had chilled me to the core. Stone coffins, dusty relics, a broken mirror leaning against the wall like a memory shattered and left unclaimed. I never returned. But now, as the morning light cast long shadows over the garden, I stood beside the rose tree with a spade in my hand, digging. The roots clung to the soil like veins. My knees ached. My breath fogged in the cold air. And then, metal. The hatch's rusted handle resisted at first, groaning as if awakened from a long slumber. I pulled harder, and the door opened with a screech that cut through the still morning like a scream. Darkness yawned below. I descended slowly, flashlight in hand, the beam dancing across the stone walls. The air grew colder with each step, thick with damp and the scent of soil and decay. My footsteps echoed unnaturally, too loud, too present. At the bottom, the crypt looked much as I remembered, 4 stone coffins, each unmarked. An altar of some kind in the center, covered in dust and mold. And against the far wall, where the broken mirror once leaned, now stood something else entirely. A table. Upon it, a 3rd tape recorder. Playing. I hadn't pressed a thing. It was already running. Victor's voice oozed from the speaker, calm and methodical. "This is where the truth sleeps, Marianne. And you've come to wake it. But you see, I've already been here. I've walked these steps. I've touched these bones. You buried more than me down here. You buried the history of Wren Hollow. You buried what your daughter never knew. What your husband swore you'd take to your grave." I clutched the flashlight tighter. The beam caught something beneath the altar. A glint. I crouched slowly. A lockbox. Ornate. Familiar. I reached for it, heart drumming in my chest. My hand trembled as I lifted the lid, and inside. Letters. Photographs. Birth certificates. Documents that didn't make sense. Until I saw the name. Clara Dane. Victor's daughter. Born in 1994. 1 year after his death. The name echoed in my mind like the toll of a long-forgotten bell. Clara Dane. It shouldn't have been possible. Victor had died in 1993, or so I believed, so I had convinced myself. But this certificate, yellowed around the edges, but unmistakably real, told a different story. Clara Dane. Born June 16, 1994. Mother unknown. Father, Victor Dane. I pulled the flashlight closer, inspecting the contents of the lockbox with trembling hands. Beneath the certificate was a photograph, faded but vivid enough to pierce my memory. Victor, older than when I had last seen him, with a child no more than 3 or 4 nestled against his chest. Her eyes, they were mine. Not in color, but in shape. In the way they narrowed slightly when she smiled. I knew that expression. I had seen it in mirrors for decades. And suddenly, it struck me. Not as a suspicion, but as certainty. She was mine. I fell back onto the cold stone floor, the breath punched from my lungs as if I'd been struck. My mind reeled, pulling at long-buried fragments of the past, the months of bleeding, the strange dreams, the fatigue that I had once dismissed as stress. Richard had insisted I was simply aging. "It's natural, Marianne," he had said. "Nothing to worry about." And when the doctor's visits ceased abruptly, I hadn't questioned it. Why would I? My world had been shrinking then, swallowed by whispers and obligations. But now I saw the truth. Richard had known. He'd taken her from me before I could even understand I was with child. Perhaps he had never meant for me to know at all. And Victor? He must have discovered the truth somehow, and when he confronted Richard, it cost him everything. Except his life. Victor had survived. And he had raised Clara in the shadows, away from Wren Hollow, away from me. Until now. The recordings. The fire. The letters. This wasn't revenge. This was a reckoning. A return. But why now? Why reveal this after all these years? I closed the box and stood slowly, the weight of the truth pressing down on my shoulders. There was no doubt in my mind. Clara was alive. She had to be. And if she had inherited even a shred of Victor's cunning, then she was behind the tapes, the fire, the games. She wanted something. Not just the truth. Not just retribution. She wanted to be seen, to be acknowledged, and she had made sure I would have no choice but to see her. It wasn't until I returned to Lydia's house, dust-streaked and silent, that I dared to look into a mirror. I had avoided my reflection for days, perhaps longer than I realized. But now I needed to see it. I needed to find in my own face what I had seen in that photograph, the shape of Clara's eyes, the tilt of her chin, the trace of something unshakably mine. I turned on the bathroom light, the bulbs buzzing faintly overhead. The mirror showed me the same woman I'd grown used to ignoring. Gray hair pinned neatly back. Wrinkles where smiles used to live. Eyes too tired, too knowing. But deeper, behind the wear and the years, I saw her. Clara. She was there in the way my left brow arched higher than the right, in the way the corners of my mouth turned slightly downward in rest. She wasn't just Victor's daughter. She was mine. A child stolen before her first breath, hidden from me beneath layers of silence and control. I pressed my fingers against the glass. What had she been told about me? That I was dead? That I had abandoned her? Or worse, that I had never wanted her at all? A knock came at the front door, jolting me from my thoughts. I moved carefully, the lockbox clutched in one hand. Lydia was still at work. The house should have been empty. I approached the door slowly, the wood floor creaking beneath my feet. Through the stained glass, I could make out a figure, tall, slender, unmoving. Not a neighbor. Not a friend. I opened the door just a crack. She stood there, wrapped in a gray coat, dark curls tucked under a wool beret. Her eyes locked onto mine like anchors. I couldn't speak. I didn't have to. She smiled. Not warmly, not cruelly, just knowingly. "Hello, Marianne," she said softly. "You look just like I imagined." I stepped back, my hand loosening on the lockbox. "Clara," I whispered. She nodded once. "I've waited a long time for this moment. But don't worry, I'm not here to hurt you. I just want to talk. And maybe see what's left of the truth you buried." She held up something small and black in her hand. A fourth tape, labeled in gold ink, "Mother." We sat across from each other in Lydia's kitchen, the dim afternoon light bleeding through the curtains, painting long shadows across the floor. Clara didn't touch the tea I'd offered her. She simply placed the tape recorder in the center of the table like a sacred offering and waited. I could barely take my eyes off her. It was like staring into the past, into a life I had never lived but somehow mourned. Her movements were precise, elegant in a way that reminded me painfully of Victor. But the weight behind her gaze, the watchfulness in her silence, that was all me. She pushed the tape across the table with one finger. "I recorded this a week ago," she said. "Before I lit the fire. Before I left the first envelope." I stared at the cassette. The label shimmered under the faint glow of the kitchen lamp. "Mother." My voice trembled. "Why all of this?" "The games, the tapes, the fire. Because I needed you to feel it," Clara replied. "What it's like to be hidden. To be unspoken." I grew up knowing my mother was a ghost, an absence. Every time I asked about her, Victor would change the subject. "He told me you were not safe. That you had made choices. That he saved me from them." She paused. "But he never told me you didn't know." I closed my eyes. The pain cracked through my ribs like old wood splintering. "I was robbed," I whispered. "Of you. Of knowing you." "I know that now," she said gently. "That's what the tape is for." With trembling hands, I pressed the play button. Her voice emerged clear, unguarded, a version of Clara not cloaked in mystery or vengeance. "I don't remember being born, but I remember the first time I realized I didn't belong. I was 6. A girl at school asked why my father never came to pick me up. I said he was busy. But she laughed and said, 'That's not your real dad anyway.' That night, I asked Victor who my mother was. He told me she was someone I could never meet. Someone dangerous. I didn't believe him, but I was afraid to ask again." The tape hissed briefly, then continued. "As I got older, I found documents, hidden photographs, letters half burned. I put the story together myself, painfully, slowly. When I saw the name, Marianne Elwood, I dug deeper. Court records, newspaper articles, a photograph of you outside Wren Hollow, taken only 5 years ago. And I realized you were alive. And had no idea I was. A long pause. A breath. I'm not here to punish you. I'm here to decide if we have anything left to save. The tape clicked off. Clara looked at me, her expression unreadable. I needed to know what kind of woman you were, she said. The kind who could bury a man. The kind who could survive betrayal. The kind who could love a daughter she never got to hold. I reached for her hand across the table. She didn't flinch. She let me. I am all of those women, I said, voice raw. And I've waited my entire life to know you, Clara. If you'll let me. We sat in silence after the tape, the air thick with something heavier than grief, recognition. It wasn't immediate forgiveness, nor reconciliation. It was something more fragile, possibility. Clara watched me with careful eyes, as though still trying to determine if I was myth or woman. I had been many things in my life: wife, widow, secret keeper, but never a mother in the true sense. I hadn't earned that title. Not yet. She folded her hands in front of her, fingers steepled, voice calm. There are things I need to know, Marianne. And not just the curated version you give to strangers. I want the whole truth. About what happened to Victor. About Richard. About you. If you want me to stay, that's the price. I nodded slowly. You deserve that. And I'll give it to you. But the truth is a dangerous thing, Clara. It doesn't just clarify, it scars. Are you ready for that? She didn't hesitate. I was raised by a man who lied to survive. I've been scarred since the day I was born. What I want now is clarity. Even if it burns. The phrase stung. Even if it burns. She was Victor's daughter, through and through. I rose from my chair and crossed to the old cedar chest I had brought with me after the fire. It smelled of smoke now, its brass clasps scorched, but inside it still held what mattered: the letters Richard wrote to his lawyers when I threatened to leave him. The journal I kept during the early days of our marriage, raw, unfiltered, documenting every cruelty in ink that still hadn't faded. And beneath that, the envelope I had never mailed. It was addressed to Victor. Unsent. Sealed. I found this the night I thought he died, I said, handing it to her. I never had the courage to open it again. I don't even remember what I wrote. She opened it without pause. Read in silence. Her lips pressed into a thin line. And when she looked up again, her eyes were wet. You loved him, she said, her voice cracking. You wanted to run away with him. I closed my eyes. Yes, but I was a coward. And in Wren Hollow, cowards are always punished. She looked down at the letter again, then back at me. I want to stay, she said. Not just for answers. I want to see who I could have been. Who I still might be. But on my terms. Name them, I said. No more locked rooms, she said. No more secrets. You open every door in Wren Hollow and in yourself. Or I walk. I held her gaze. Then I'll hand you the keys. Outside, the wind stirred through the trees, sweeping the last of the ash from the garden. The fire had destroyed much, but maybe, just maybe, it had cleared the way for something to grow. The keys to Wren Hollow were still in my coat pocket, soot-smudged and slightly warped from the heat. I'd gripped them tighter than I realized when the fire began, as if even then I knew that the real damage wasn't in what the flames would destroy, but in what they might reveal. Clara held them now. She didn't jingle them or test the weight in her palm. She stared at them like someone facing the final piece of a long unsolved riddle. There's one room you haven't mentioned, she said, not looking at me. The door at the end of the west hall. The one with the brass lock. What's in there? I had been dreading that question. That room hasn't been opened since your grandfather died, I said. Even Richard left it alone. It belonged to his father and to his father before that. No one talked about it. Not even the staff. Clara's expression didn't change. So, it's a family secret room? In Wren Hollow, that just means it holds something too cruel to admit aloud. We didn't go immediately. We waited until dusk, when the world seemed to hold its breath. The skeleton of the house still stood, charred, wounded, but not yet surrendered. The west wing had been mostly spared by the fire, the hallway still intact though dark and heavy with the scent of damp wood and old memories. We reached the door together. Brass. Unmarked. Not even a keyhole visible until you ran your fingers just right along the molding. It clicked faintly under Clara's touch. "You do it," I said, stepping back. "It should be you." She hesitated only briefly before sliding the key in. The lock gave with a reluctant groan. The door creaked open. The room was colder than I remembered, colder than it should have been, like it had kept time sealed inside. The walls were lined with portraits. Not hung, but leaned, hundreds of them, in thick antique frames, faces turned inward, hidden. The only source of light was a tall window that let the moon in like a spotlight. Clara stepped forward first, then stopped. "These are all women," she said. I nodded. The women of Wren Hollow. The ones the men tried to erase. Daughters sent away. Wives lost to illness. Sisters committed. Each one cast out for being inconvenient. She walked slowly through the rows. One by one, she turned the portraits over, revealing faces painted in exquisite detail. Some were serene, others defiant. But all of them carried a truth I knew too well. They had seen something, lived something, been silenced. Near the center, Clara paused. Her hand hovered over one portrait larger than the rest. The frame was darker, dustier. When she turned it, I felt my knees weaken. It was me, younger, seated in the garden. A look in my eyes I hadn't seen in decades, hope. "It was painted the day I told Richard the First was leaving," I whispered. He had the painter come that very afternoon. Said he wanted to capture me as I was before I changed my mind. I never saw it again after that. Clara looked at the painting, then at me. Her expression softened. "He wanted to trap you in an image. But you escaped anyway." "Not without scars," I murmured. She turned back to the painting. Then, wordlessly, she lifted it off the easel and carried it to the center of the room. She placed it face up beneath the moonlight. Then she did the same with 3 others. And then she looked at me. "I think it's time we turn all the women of Wren Hollow to face the light." It took hours. Together, Clara and I lifted each portrait, one by one, brushing off years of dust and rot, turning their faces toward the moon. By the time we reached the final row, the room looked entirely different, no longer a tomb, but a gathering. A gallery of women once silenced, now bearing witness. Clara didn't speak much as we worked. She was methodical, reverent, almost ritualistic. I caught her pausing to study certain faces, lingering on a woman with dark braids and a stubborn set to her jaw, another with green eyes full of sorrow. These women, unknown to her, were ancestors. Survivors. Wounds dressed in lace and paint. When the last portrait had been turned, we stood in the center of the room, breathless and surrounded. I felt something loosen in my chest, something I hadn't known was knotted for decades. Clara turned to me. "There's space for one more," she said. I followed her gaze. Against the far wall, an empty easel stood waiting. Dusty, bare. I laughed softly. "Don't tell me you've taken up painting." She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a slim black box. I knew what it was before she opened it. A frame, gilded, modern, but empty. "I had this made before I ever met you," she said. "I didn't know what I'd find when I got here. I didn't even know if I'd want to stay. But I brought this because," she paused, searching for the right words, "because I wanted to leave a space. For possibility. For my own story. For something I could choose." Clara walked to the easel, placed the frame upon it, and stepped back. The empty space seemed to pulse in the candlelight. "I don't want to be a ghost in this house," she said. "I don't want to be someone else's secret or someone else's revenge. I want my place here to be mine." Not stolen. Not inherited. Chosen. My throat ached. You are not a mistake. Or a shadow. You are the first truth this house has known in generations. She looked at me then, eyes bright with tears she didn't let fall. Then help me build something different. From the ashes. From all of it. I nodded. We'll start with a name on the door. Your room. Your rules. She smiled, truly smiled, for the first time since she'd walked through my door. And in that room of silenced women, with moonlight glinting off the gilded frame, Clara Dane, the daughter I never got to raise, chose her own place in the story. Not as a ghost, but as a woman finally seen. The rebuilding began quietly, without ceremony or fanfare. No contractors. No architects. Just Clara and me, two women with calloused hands and shared shadows, moving through the ruins of Wren Hollow with purpose. We started in the garden. The roses had withered after the fire, their roots choked by ash. Clara insisted we dig them up. They've grown over too many buried things, she said. In their place, we planted jasmine, lavender, and honeysuckle. Flowers that didn't need perfection to bloom, only light and a little time. Inside, we stripped the house bare. Room by room, we pulled down the curtains, tore out the rotting wood, and opened the windows to air it out for the first time in years. The West Wing, once suffocating with portraits and secrecy, became a studio. Clara brought in canvases and light. She began to paint. Not from memory, but from presence. She painted the women of Wren Hollow again, but differently. Not trapped in static, mournful poses, but in motion, one laughing, one looking over her shoulder, another mid-stride with wind in her hair. And she painted herself last. That portrait hangs in the center of the studio now. Clara in a charcoal sweater, standing beneath the rose tree we removed, her gaze direct, lips just on the edge of a smile. It's not sentimental. It's not soft. But it's honest. And it's hers. I took the attic next. A place I had long feared. The floor where Victor had fallen, the place where I once imagined a secret buried forever. I cleaned it until the wood shone. I moved my writing desk there. It's where I now sit most mornings, journaling what I remember, not just of the fire or Victor or Richard, but of myself. Who I was before silence taught me how to survive. Clara asked me once, as we painted the hallway together, "Do you regret it?" I knew what she meant. The wall I built, the years I lost, the lies I let take root. I thought about it, then answered honestly. I regret the silences, not the survival. I did what I could with what I had. But now? Now I choose to speak. She nodded. Then we do it together. And we did. The house began to feel lighter, not just in structure, but in soul. Laughter echoed where once only footsteps did. We hosted a dinner, just the two of us at first, then neighbors, then old friends who thought I had died with the fire. They came and saw the new Wren Hollow. They saw Clara. And they stayed. Even in a house rewritten, echoes still remain. There are moments quiet, breathless, when I hear the old creak of a stair that no one is climbing, or feel a breeze that carries the scent of firewood long since burned. Wren Hollow remembers. It does not forget, but it no longer punishes. Clara moved into the East Wing, the one the fire had nearly claimed. We rebuilt it together, wall by wall, until it no longer resembled a corridor of ghosts, but a place of beginnings. She kept her father's last tape in a box by the window, not to listen, but to remind herself that her story didn't begin with a lie, but with a choice to uncover it. I kept my own relics. The journal I once hid in the lining of a drawer. The letter I wrote to Victor that never found its way to his hands. These are my echoes, too. Evidence not of failure, but of the woman I was before I understood the power of truth. We talk about him sometimes, Victor. Not as a ghost, not as a legend, but as a man. Flawed, brilliant, grieving in his own way. Clara grieves for him quietly, in the early morning hours when she walks the garden alone. I let her. We all grieve in our own language. One evening, She came to me holding a single rose, red, full, impossibly vibrant. "This grew from the ash," she said, "right where we thought nothing would take root again." I took it from her, the stem rough against my palm, the petals velvet soft. "Some things survive the fire," I told her, "but some things needed to bloom." That night, she placed the rose on the mantel of the new library, no longer a place of secrets, but of stories. We read there often, curled into opposite corners of the same room, sometimes in silence, sometimes aloud. The echo of the past remains in Wren Hollow, but it no longer demands silence. It simply listens, because now the house has a new voice. Ours. The season turned. Spring gave way to summer, and the air around Wren Hollow grew warm and forgiving. The jasmine bloomed in thick clusters along the garden gate, and laughter spilled out through the window, soft, unforced. It was no longer a house holding its breath. It had begun, finally, to exhale. Clara's paintings filled the walls now. Not just portraits, but landscapes, abstractions, scenes pulled from dreams and memories. One day she painted the hallway before the fire, just as it was, down to the crack in the molding and the smear of ivy against the glass. I asked her why. "To remember," she said. "Not to return, just to honor the path we walked through." I understood. For years, I had lived inside the architecture of silence. My grief had been structured, polite, tidy, suppressed. But now, as I sat on the veranda with a book in my lap and the sun slipping behind the trees, I realized something. I no longer feared my own story. Clara joined me there one evening. She brought wine, 2 glasses, and a manila envelope. "I found this in Victor's things," she said. "It's the last piece. Then it's yours to keep or destroy." Inside were letters. Dozens of them. Some addressed to me but never sent. Others meant for Clara, when she was still too young to read. In them, Victor's voice softened. Apologetic. Angry. Afraid. But always full of longing for peace, for understanding, for a world where truth didn't demand sacrifice. I read them aloud to her, one by one. We cried only once. At the final line of the final letter. "Tell her." I never stopped waiting for her to find us. The sky turned violet above the trees. Clara leaned her head against my shoulder. No more words passed between us. None were needed. Wren Hollow had been a house built on control, on denial and legacy. But now, in the spaces once crammed with ghosts, we had planted something better. A home. One where silence was no longer a shield. One where love, though late, had taken root. And this time, it would not be hidden. Here the story ends. Thanks for watching. Hit like, share, and subscribe to my channel for more true and real stories.